the father of my children. He promised he would stay with me. Tell me it's a lie.
I'll never forget the sound of her heels. They echoed across the marble floor of St. Matthew's Church, sharp and angry, as if each step carried 1,000 accusations. Everyone turned their heads, whispers cut through the air like razor blades, and before I could even process what was happening, a woman stood at the center aisle with 2 children gripping her hands. And then she said it. Words that ripped through my wedding day like a thunderclap. This man is my husband, and these, she pulled the children closer, these are his kids. The gasp that erupted from the pews felt louder than the church bells that had rung minutes earlier. My bouquet slipped from my hands, the organist stopped mid-note. I swear, even the candles flickered as though the whole universe recoiled at her revelation. I had dreamed of this day my whole life. The white dress, the veil, the vows whispered under stained glass light. But in that moment, my dream shattered into shards so sharp I could almost feel them slicing into my chest. Everyone stared at me, some with pity, others with judgment. I could hear the murmurs already. She didn't know? Poor girl. How humiliating. My bridesmaids froze like mannequins. My father clutched the back of the pew, and my mother covered her mouth to keep from gasping out loud. But the person I remember most vividly? My groom, Michael. He didn't move, didn't even blink. His jaw clenched, his face drained of color. And for one terrifying moment, I thought he might actually lunge at her. He looked cornered, like a wolf exposed. "Don't believe her," he snapped finally, his voice so sharp it startled even the priest. "This is insane. She's lying." But was she? The woman wasn't dressed for drama. No wild makeup, no desperate tears. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair tied back in a messy bun. The children clung to her, confused and fidgeting, but one of them, maybe 6 years old, kept staring at Michael with wide, unblinking eyes, as if he recognized him. And in that moment, something inside me twisted, because deep down, I believed her. Do you know that feeling when the ground beneath you feels like it might open up and swallow you whole? That was me standing in a dress that suddenly felt more like a costume than a gown. I had dreamed of walking down that aisle since I was a little girl, but not like this. Not into a nightmare staged in front of 200 horrified guests. People started whispering louder. Someone actually shouted, "Is this true?" Another voice said, "He should be ashamed." And Michael, he just kept denying. "She's obsessed with me," he insisted, his eyes darting, his hand tightening around mine. "She's tried this before. Don't listen to her. She's crazy." But here's the thing. When a man's defense is, "she's crazy," it doesn't convince anyone. The priest shifted uncomfortably, trying to calm the chaos. But the damage was already done. My perfect fairy tale wedding had collapsed, and there was no salvaging it. I should have run. I should have turned and walked straight out of that church, ripped the veil from my head, and never looked back. But I didn't. Because the truth is, that day wasn't just the collapse of a wedding. It was the beginning of something much darker, much more dangerous. Now, let me pause here, because I know what you're thinking. What happened next? Did you confront her? Did you cancel the wedding? Did you demand answers? And I promise I will tell you, but first, you need to understand something. What happened in that church was not a coincidence. It wasn't fate or karma or some stranger showing up to ruin my life. That moment, the woman, the children, the accusations, it was all part of something bigger. Something I hadn't told a single soul until now. But standing there in that white dress, I played the part of the devastated bride. My lips trembled, my hands shook, and the world spun around me. I let the whispers burn into my ears and the pitying stares pierce my heart. Because that's what they expected. The betrayed bride. I let them believe I was broken. Michael pulled me close, whispering furiously into my ear, his breath hot and sour. "Don't you dare believe her. Don't you dare embarrass me like this." But embarrassment was the least of my worries. Because in that church, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Violence. Pure, simmering rage. The kind of anger that could shatter more than just a wedding. That was the moment I knew I wasn't safe. Not with him. Not even in public. The woman refused to leave. She stood her ground, her children clinging tighter. "You can deny me all you want, Michael," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "But you can't deny them. They're yours. Everyone can see it." Gasps again. Heads turned, eyes searched the children's faces for resemblance, and I swear to you, it was there. The little boy had Michael's sharp jawline. The little girl had his same piercing eyes. I almost fainted. Michael yanked my hand harder, practically dragging me toward the altar as if forcing the ceremony to continue would erase what had just happened. The priest stammered, "Perhaps we should," but Michael cut him off with a glare so fierce the man went silent. But then the whispers turned to shouts. Guests demanded answers. Some even stood to block Michael's path. The church erupted into chaos, families divided, friends arguing, voices clashing. And in the middle of it all, I realized my wedding was over. Maybe my entire life was over too. I didn't scream, I didn't run. I just stood there, frozen, as if my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up with yet, that this wasn't just about betrayal or humiliation. It was about survival. Because if everything the woman said was true, and if the look in Michael's eyes was any sign, I was about to marry a man who could destroy me. And maybe you're wondering, why didn't you leave earlier? Why didn't you see the signs? Oh, I did. I saw them. I felt them. But when you're too deep, when someone's charm has wrapped around your life like chains, escaping isn't so easy. The rest of that day is a blur. People shouting, children crying, Michael raging, my parents trying to shield me, friends dragging me toward the exit. The last thing I remember clearly is the look on Michael's face as I walked out of that church without him, like a storm bottled up in a man's skin. That was the end of my wedding. But not the end of the story. Because what no one in that church knew, not Michael, not my parents, not even the woman with the children, was that everything they saw had been orchestrated. Every second of that chaos, every gasp, every tear, it was all part of a plan. My plan. And before you judge me, before you think I'm heartless or cruel, you need to understand why. You need to know what pushed me to orchestrate the most humiliating moment of my own life just to escape him. Because Michael wasn't just a liar. He wasn't just a cheater. He was something far, far worse. And if I hadn't done what I did that day, if I hadn't created that disaster, I might not be alive to tell you this story. So sit with me, listen closely, because now I'm going to tell you how a dream wedding turned into a nightmare, and why it had to be that way. If you had met him the way I did, you probably would have fallen for him too. That's the truth I need to start with, because it's easy from the outside to look at my story and say, how could she not see it? How could she be so blind? But Michael was everything a woman is taught to dream about. I first saw him in a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Boston. I remember because I was running late to work, Juggling my umbrella, my laptop bag, and the heel of my shoe had snapped on the slick pavement. I stumbled through the door, soaked and humiliated, and there he was, sitting by the window, sipping black coffee, with that kind of presence that makes you stop for just a second. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair slicked back neatly, he wore a crisp suit that looked tailored but not flashy. And when he saw me struggling, he stood immediately, offering a napkin, a smile, and this line I'll never forget. "Don't worry, every queen deserves a rough entrance now and then." I laughed. I couldn't help it. And that was how it began. He was attentive in a way that felt intoxicating. He texted, "Good morning," before I even opened my eyes. He remembered small details, like the way I took my coffee, or the fact that I always carried a notebook for scribbling ideas. He sent flowers to my office, not the generic roses, but wildflowers, because he said they matched my untamed spirit. You see what I mean? Perfect. Too perfect? Our first dates felt like scenes from a romance movie. Dinners at candlelit restaurants, late-night walks by the Charles River, spontaneous weekend getaways. He had money, clearly, but he never flaunted it. Instead, he made it seem effortless, like he was just this generous man who wanted to give me the world. And I believed him. My friends adored him. My parents approved almost instantly. "That man is a provider," my father said after their first dinner together. "Don't lose him," my mother whispered when Michael surprised us with front-row tickets to a Broadway show. Everyone saw the same thing I did. Charm, confidence, stability. He was the kind of man families dream their daughters will marry. But looking back, I can see the cracks were there from the very beginning. I just chose not to see them. The first time I noticed something odd, we had been dating for about 3 months. I was out with my best friend Claire, having drinks. I texted Michael to let him know, but I didn't hear back. A couple of hours later, when I finally checked my phone, I had 15 missed calls. 15. And when I called him back, he answered on the first ring. His voice was cold, sharp. "Why didn't you pick up? Where are you? Who's there with you?" I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Relax, I'm just with Claire, you know her. We're at the usual spot." But he didn't relax. Instead, he showed up at the bar, uninvited. He slid into the booth next to me with that perfect smile plastered on his face, charming Claire, while his hand tightened on my thigh under the table, so tight I could feel the warning in his grip. I told myself he was just protective, that maybe he cared too much. But deep down, a small, quiet voice whispered, "This isn't normal." Over time, those little moments grew louder. He hated when I wore certain dresses, said they were too revealing. He discouraged me from spending time with male coworkers, even in group settings. He criticized the way I laughed too loudly in public. Always with that same excuse, "I just want to protect you, I know how men think." And when he said it, he made it sound like love, like his possessiveness was proof of his devotion. And I wanted so badly to believe it. So I did. But there were darker moments too. Moments I buried so deep I can hardly bring myself to admit them now. Like the night we argued about me going on a weekend trip with friends. He slammed his fist against the wall, inches from my face. The sound echoed in my ears for hours afterwards, even as he held me and apologized, swearing it would never happen again. Or the time I mentioned an old boyfriend in passing. Nothing romantic, just a story. And Michael went silent for 2 whole days, punishing me with cold distance until I begged for forgiveness for something I hadn't even done. Those moments were red flags. No, blazing neon warning signs. But I had convinced myself that Michael was the one, that relationships were supposed to be hard, that passion came with jealousy, that love meant compromise. And maybe the scariest part, he could switch back to being perfect Michael in an instant. One bouquet of flowers, one charming smile, one whispered apology, and I'd forget the fear. at least for a while. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you run the first time he scared you? The truth? Because leaving Michael didn't feel like an option. By then, he had woven himself into every corner of my life. He knew where I worked, where my family lived, who my friends were. He had gifts waiting at my parents' house, dinners planned with my boss, vacations booked months in advance. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my entire world. Or at least that's what he wanted me to think. And it worked. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed. Not in private, not in a quiet romantic moment, but at a huge family gathering with both our families present. He got down on one knee, holding a diamond ring so large it sparkled like a star, and asked me in front of everyone. My family erupted in cheers. My mother cried, my father clapped him on the back, Claire squealed and hugged me. And me? I said yes, because what choice did I have? Even if a part of me hesitated, even if that quiet voice deep inside screamed, "No, don't do it," the pressure was too much. Backing out in that moment would have made me look ungrateful, crazy even. So I smiled. I let him slide the ring onto my finger, and in that instant, I sealed my fate. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of planning, fittings, tastings, and endless details. Michael insisted on being involved in everything. Too involved. He controlled the guest list, vetoed menu choices, even argued with me over the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. "It's my wedding too," he reminded me constantly. But it never felt like ours. It felt like his. And every time I tried to push back, his temper flared. Sometimes with silence, sometimes with words that cut deeper than any blade, and sometimes with his hands, slamming doors, smashing glasses, leaving bruises on walls that I prayed would never appear on me. By then, the quiet voice in my head wasn't quiet anymore. It was screaming. But I felt trapped. The date was set, the invitations sent, the deposits paid. My parents had invested thousands into the ceremony. Guests were flying in from across the country. How could I possibly call it off? I told myself I'd survive, that maybe marriage would soften him, calm him, make him settle down, that maybe once the stress of the wedding was over, we'd be happy again. But that was a lie. And deep down, I knew it. And then came the discovery. The thing that tore away the last veil of denial and forced me to see Michael for who he really was. Because as much as the jealousy, the control, the temper scared me, I could still convince myself it was love. But what I found one night proved it was something else entirely. Something criminal. Something dangerous. But I'll save that for next time. I remember the night like it was carved into stone. It was late, the week before the wedding, and Michael had gone out for business. He didn't say where, didn't say with who, and I daren't press for details. By then, I had learned that pressing him too hard meant slammed doors, icy silences, and apologies that always felt more like warnings than comfort. But that night, I was restless. Maybe it was nerves about the wedding. Maybe it was that gnawing voice inside me, whispering, "Check, look, find out before it's too late." Whatever it was, I found myself pacing the house, my heart pounding, as if it already knew what my mind refused to admit. That was when I noticed it. The drawer. Michael's office was normally locked, but he had been careless that day, rushing out and leaving the door ajar. Inside, everything was meticulous. Books aligned perfectly, pens arranged by size, files stacked with military precision. But on his mahogany desk, the bottom drawer was slightly open, just enough for me to see a corner of paper sticking out. And something about it called to me. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that even touching his things without permission could spark his rage. But curiosity and fear are dangerous companions. They make you braver than you should be. So I knelt down, pulled the drawer open, and my entire world shifted. Inside were envelopes, thick ones, stuffed with cash. Not a few $100s, not even a few thousand. I'm talking stacks upon stacks of $100 bills banded tightly like they'd come straight from a bank. Tens of thousands, maybe more. And alongside the money, documents. Contracts written in language I barely understood, but the names, the signatures, the stamps, some looked official, others forged. I saw property deeds under fake names, offshore bank account details, and a small black ledger filled with numbers, initials, and coded notes. But the thing that chilled me most were the photographs. Grainy pictures of men I didn't know. Some in suits, some looking rougher, more dangerous. A few were taken in parking lots, some at restaurants, others near unmarked buildings. On the back of each photo was a name, sometimes a date, sometimes the word paid, scrawled in harsh black ink. And one of those names I recognized. It was the name of a local councilman, a man who had made headlines recently for pushing legislation against organized crime. My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled so badly the papers slipped between my fingers and scattered on the floor. Michael wasn't just controlling. He wasn't just jealous. He was a criminal. The sound of my heartbeat was deafening. I scrambled to put everything back exactly as I found it, terrified he'd walk in at any second. But as I reached to close the drawer, something else caught my eye. A gun. Tucked neatly beneath the papers, as casual as if it were a stapler or a paperweight. Black, polished, and unmistakably real. I froze, staring at it, my reflection glinting off the barrel. My breath came in shallow gasps. I had never touched a weapon in my life, never even been near one, and here it was, sitting in my fiancé's desk like it belonged there. At that moment, the image of our future together cracked like glass. The white picket fence, the children, the shared vacations, it all vanished. In its place, I saw something else. Police sirens, prison bars, maybe even blood. And me, I'd be the wife who knew too much. I closed the drawer and stumbled out of the office, my legs weak, my hands clammy. I wanted to scream, to run, to tear the engagement ring from my finger and hurl it into the night. But instead, I sat on the couch, frozen, waiting for him to come home. Hours passed. When he finally walked through the door, whistling like nothing in the world could trouble him, I plastered a smile on my face and pretended everything was fine. "Hey, beautiful," he said, kissing my forehead. "Miss me?" I nodded. My voice caught in my throat. Because if he suspected I had seen what was in that drawer, I wasn't sure what he would do. That night, I barely slept. My mind spun in endless circles. Do I confront him? Do I tell my parents? Do I call the police? But then I imagined his hands slamming into the wall beside my head. I imagined his voice, low and dangerous, whispering threats he never had to say out loud. And I knew confronting him would be suicide. So I stayed quiet. For days, I pretended everything was normal, smiled through cake tastings, posed for engagement photos, accepted congratulations from friends, all while a storm brewed inside me. But silence doesn't erase danger, it only delays it. The breaking point came a few nights later. We were at dinner, celebrating some milestone he claimed to have reached at work. I forced myself to sip wine, to nod and smile though my stomach churned. At one point, he excused himself to take a phone call. He stepped outside, but he didn't go far enough. I could see him through the glass window of the restaurant, pacing, gesturing sharply, his voice muffled but distinct enough for certain words to cut through. Shipment. Deadline. Don't screw this up. And then, or you know what happens. I froze, the fork slipping from my hand. When he returned, smiling, his tie loosened casually, I pretended not to notice. But in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty. Michael wasn't just flirting with crime. He was living in it, breathing it, thriving in it. And if I married him, I'd be dragged into that world whether I wanted it or not. But here's the catch. Leaving him wasn't simple. By then, the wedding was only a week away. My family had spent money, guests were flying in, deposits had been paid. And Michael, he was watching me more closely than ever. I felt his eyes on me when I left the room. He asked questions about where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. He held my hand tighter, kissed me harder, as if testing my loyalty. I was trapped. Every exit felt sealed. Until an idea crept into my mind. An idea so wild, so desperate, it scared even me. If I couldn't walk away quietly, maybe I could blow everything up. The seed of the plan came late one night as I stared at the ceiling, my heart racing. I thought about that gun, those envelopes of cash, those photographs. I thought about the way Michael's temper flared when he didn't get his way. And I thought about how the world adored him, the charming fiancé, the doting partner, the man who had everyone fooled. How could I possibly expose him without becoming his next target? And then I realized I couldn't expose him directly, but I could destroy him indirectly. If I humiliated him publicly in front of everyone, he wouldn't be able to spin it as my fault. He wouldn't be able to paint me as the crazy one. His perfect image would shatter, and I'd finally have the excuse I needed to walk away. It would be messy, painful, traumatic, but it would be safe. And that is how the plan was born. I couldn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends, not even Claire. If Michael suspected for a second that I was plotting against him, it would be over. So I kept my secret. I smiled when people said you must be so excited. I nodded when they said he's such a great guy. I tried on the dress, posed for the photos, rehearsed the vows, all while planning the most humiliating ambush of my own life. Because if destroying my wedding was the only way to save myself, then that was what I would do. When I tell you that planning a wedding is stressful, I know I'm preaching to the choir. But imagine planning 2 weddings at the same time. One, the perfect fairy tale celebration, white roses, sparkling chandeliers, a cake so tall it practically touched the ceiling, the kind of wedding little girls dream of. And the other, a catastrophe, a staged disaster, a carefully orchestrated implosion. I wasn't just planning a wedding anymore. I was planning my escape. The first step was figuring out the how. I couldn't just leave Michael at the altar. That would make me look unstable, cold, heartless. He was too good at playing the victim, too good at making people believe he was the wronged one. If I ran, he would hunt me down and everyone would sympathize with him. No, I needed something bigger, something undeniable, something that would make even the most devoted family friend whisper, "Poor girl, she had no choice but to walk away."
And that meant exposing Michael publicly. Not his crimes, I didn't have enough proof to make that stick, but his character, his reputation, his image. If I could turn the spotlight on him and make him ugly in front of everyone, he'd lose control of the story. He'd lose me. That was when the idea of her took shape. I didn't know who she would be yet, but I knew the role she had to play. The other woman. A scorned lover. A forgotten fling. Someone who could walk into that church, drag the skeletons out of Michael's closet, and set them down right in front of the altar. It had to be brutal. It had to be believable. And most of all, it had to be public. Because once the words were spoken, once the scandal exploded, there would be no undoing it. Finding her was harder than I expected. I couldn't hire an actress. It was too risky. I couldn't ask a friend. Too much chance of it leaking back to Michael. I needed someone desperate enough to agree, but discreet enough to vanish afterward. And that's where fate stepped in. A week before the wedding, I met Hannah. She was sitting outside a grocery store, 2 little kids huddled against her, a cardboard sign at her feet. It read, "Single mom, lost my job. Anything helps." I almost walked past, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the way her kids clung to her, or maybe it was the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind of exhaustion I saw in myself every time I looked in the mirror. I bought her a sandwich, sat down beside her, and started to talk. And that's when it hit me. She was perfect. Of course, I couldn't just blurt out my plan. Who in their right mind would agree to crash a stranger's wedding? So I eased into it. I asked about her life, her struggles. She told me about the abusive ex who had disappeared years ago, leaving her with debts and 2 mouths to feed. She told me how every job she managed to find slipped away when childcare collapsed. She told me about nights when she skipped dinner so her kids could eat. Her voice shook as she spoke, but her eyes were strong, fierce. She was fighting every day, and losing, but still fighting. I knew then, she didn't just need money, she needed a chance. And I needed her. It was the strangest proposition I've ever made. "Hannah," I said carefully, "what if I could pay you more than a month's rent, more than groceries for the next few weeks? What if I told you I need help, but not the kind you're expecting?" She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of help?" And then, trembling, my heart racing, I told her. Not everything, not about Michael's crimes, not about the gun in the drawer, or the cash in envelopes. Just enough to make it sound like a desperate woman's plan to escape a toxic relationship. I told her I needed someone to walk into my wedding, accuse my fiancé of being unfaithful, and cause enough of a scene that the ceremony would fall apart. Her mouth fell open. "You want me to ruin your wedding?" "Yes," I whispered. "Exactly." Her first instinct was to laugh, but when she saw my face, she stopped. "Why would you want that?" she asked. "Because I said, my throat tightening. "If I don't have an excuse to end this, I won't survive it." We sat in silence for a long time. The kids were coloring on scraps of cardboard, oblivious to the storm brewing in front of them. Finally, Hannah said, "What do you want me to do?" And just like that, the plan was set in motion. Over the next few days, we met in secret, at coffee shops across town, in parking lots, anywhere Michael would never think to look. I gave her the outline. She would arrive late, just after the ceremony started, burst through the doors with her children, and shout the words that would shatter everything. "I'm his wife. These are his children." The line alone would be enough to detonate the room. Gasps, whispers, accusations. It would spread like wildfire. The guests wouldn't know what to believe, but it wouldn't matter. The damage would be done. And me, I'd play the shocked bride, heartbroken, betrayed. I'd walk out, tears streaming down my face, and no one would ever question my decision not to marry Michael. We rehearsed her lines. I gave her money for clothes, nothing fancy, just enough to make her look like a woman on the edge of breaking, holding her children close. I told her not to overdo it. The key was believability. Too much drama and people might think it was fake. Too little and they might pity Michael instead. She practiced her entrance again and again, her voice trembling but strong. And every time I watched, I felt a knot of guilt tightening in my chest. Because Hannah didn't know the truth. She didn't know she was stepping into the middle of something far darker than a failed marriage. She didn't know Michael wasn't just a bad fiancé, he was dangerous. And if he suspected for a second that I had orchestrated the whole thing, he might come after both of us. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. The dress hung in the corner of the room, glowing ghostly white in the moonlight. My phone buzzed with messages from friends. Good luck, can't wait, so happy for you. I typed out a dozen replies, deleted them all, and finally sent nothing. At 2 a.m., I texted Hannah instead. Remember, come in halfway through, hold the kids close, don't look at me. Just shout it loud and clear, then leave. I'll handle the rest. Her reply came minutes later. Got it. I won't let you down. I put the phone down, stared at the ceiling, and whispered a prayer. Not to God. I wasn't sure I believed anymore, but to anyone, anything that might be listening. Please, let this work. Let me get out alive. And then the day came. The morning of my wedding was beautiful. Clear skies, warm sunlight, a gentle breeze, the kind of day brides dream of. I went through the motions like an actress in a play. Makeup, hair, the lace gown carefully zipped. Photographs with my bridesmaids, laughter that sounded real enough to fool even me. But underneath it all, my stomach churned with dread. Because I knew that when I walked down that aisle, I wasn't walking toward forever. I was walking straight into chaos. When I picture that day in my head, it almost feels like a movie. The flowers, the candles, the hush of expectation that filled the church. My father's arm linked with mine as we stood in the back, ready for our cue. Michael was waiting at the altar, looking every bit the perfect groom. Sharp tuxedo, practiced smile, a man who seemed to have it all. And me? I was the leading lady, stepping into a role I had written for myself. The organ began to play. Guests rose to their feet, heads turning, eyes brimming with joy. Phones lifted to capture the moment. My father squeezed my hand, whispering, "You look beautiful, sweetheart." But inside, I was ice. Every step down that aisle felt like walking to a cliff, because I knew what was coming. I could see Michael's face clearly now, his lips curling into that polished grin. To everyone else, it was charming. To me, it was a mask I'd learned to hate. Behind those teeth lurked the temper, the threats, the cruelty. And soon, the world would see a glimpse of it too. We reached the altar. My father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Michael's. The pastor welcomed everyone, his voice gentle, ceremonial. My bridesmaids smiled. My mother dabbed her eyes. The audience leaned forward, waiting for the vows. And then the doors slammed open. The sound was so loud, so sharp, it cut through the music like a gunshot. Everyone's heads whipped around. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. And there she was, Hannah. Clutching the hands of her 2 children, her face flushed, her eyes wild with urgency. She looked exactly as we had rehearsed, disheveled but strong, desperate yet unafraid. She shouted, "My name is Hannah Reynolds, and this man," she pointed a shaking finger at Michael, "is my husband. These are his children." The church erupted. Gasps, shouts.
people whispering in horror, others twisting around to look at Michael, at me, at the children.
The pastor froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. My mother's bouquet tumbled to the floor. My bridesmaids clutched each other, their faces pale. And Michael? He went rigid. His smile vanished, his jaw tightening, as his eyes flicked from Hannah to the children to me. "No!" he barked. His voice was loud, commanding, but not enough to quiet the chaos. "This is insane! I don't know this woman." But Hannah was ready. "Yes, you do," she cried, dragging the children closer to the altar. "You know me. You promised me forever, and then you left. You left us." Her little boy clung to her leg, his wide eyes brimming with tears. Her daughter buried her face in her mother's skirt. And that image, the desperate mother, the innocent children, was all it took. The room turned against him. I felt the eyes of 100 guests swing toward me, pity, shock, horror. And I did exactly what I'd planned. I gasped, staggered back, and let the tears fall. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Michael, is it true?" He spun toward me, fury blazing in his eyes, but quickly smoothed his face. "Of course not! Emily, listen to me! She's lying!" But his words fell flat. The damage was done. The whispers grew louder. People pulled out their phones, recording, snapping photos. The scandal was spreading before my very eyes. And Michael was losing control. "Security!" he shouted, waving toward the back of the church. "Get her out of here!" But the guards hesitated. They weren't sure what to do. This wasn't a drunk uncle or an unruly guest. This was a woman claiming to be his wife. And the crowd wasn't on his side. "You're a liar!" someone shouted from the pews. "How could you do this to her?" another voice cried. The noise was deafening. And for the first time, I saw something I had never seen in Michael before. Panic. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my skin as he hissed into my ear, low enough for only me to hear. "Did you do this?" My heart stopped. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. I forced my face into a mask of confusion, yanking my arm away. "Don't touch me!" I screamed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd gasped again, this time at his aggression. Phones tilted toward us, recording every second. Michael's mask was cracking. Hannah shouted again, her voice trembling. "Michael, look at them! Look at your children! They deserve to know the truth." The boy began to cry, and the sound pierced through the church like glass shattering. Michael's face contorted. He opened his mouth, closed it again, rage rolling off him in waves. He was trapped. If he admitted nothing, he looked heartless. If he tried to explain, he'd only dig deeper. And me? I stood there, clutching my bouquet, pretending my entire world had just fallen apart. When in reality, this was the most powerful I had ever felt. Finally, Michael snapped. "Enough!" he roared, his voice booming, his face twisted with fury. "This is a setup, a scam. I don't know these people." But the more he shouted, the more unhinged he appeared. Guests recoiled, whispers turned into condemnation, and I let the tears flow harder. My mascara streaked, my hand shook, my lips trembled. Then I did the unthinkable. I dropped my bouquet and ran. The crowd parted as I fled down the aisle, my dress sweeping behind me, sobs tearing from my throat. Cameras followed me, guests whispering, "Poor Emily, that monster. She doesn't deserve this." It was working. Every second, the narrative shifted further in my favor. Behind me, I heard Michael shouting, cursing, demanding control, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos. And Hannah? She disappeared, just as planned. Outside the church, I collapsed onto the steps, my bridesmaids rushing after me. They wrapped their arms around me, crying with me, comforting me. And through the blur of tears, I looked up at the bright, clear sky. I was free. At least, that's what I thought. Because I didn't realize that by tearing off Michael's mask in front of everyone, I had also painted a target on my back.
That night, after the chaos of the ruined wedding, the church stood empty. The flowers were wilted, the champagne untouched, the cake still towering in the reception hall, waiting for a celebration that never came. But I wasn't thinking about flowers or cake. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, still in the lace gown, mascara smeared across my cheeks, my mother and father on either side of me. My bridesmaids had gone home. The whispers of guests had faded into the night. And for the first time in months, I let the walls crumble. I told them everything. At first, my words tumbled out in fragments. About Michael's temper, about the drawer with the gun, about the phone calls in the night, about the money he couldn't explain, about the way he controlled me, isolated me, chipped away at who I was until I felt like nothing more than a shadow. My mother's face went pale. My father clenched his fists, jaw tight with fury. Then I told them about the plan, about Hannah, about how I had orchestrated the spectacle in the church because it was the only way to get out without becoming another one of Michael's victims. I couldn't just leave him, I whispered, my voice shaking. If I had tried, he would have hurt me, maybe worse. I had to make it public. I had to make it so big, so humiliating that he couldn't spin it in his favor. There was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. And then my father reached out, took my trembling hand, and said, "You did what you had to do to survive." It was like a dam breaking. I sobbed into my mother's arms, years of fear pouring out of me. For the first time, I wasn't alone in carrying the secret. But that didn't solve the bigger problem. Michael was still out there. And after what I had done to him in front of everyone, I knew he wouldn't forgive. He wouldn't forget. He would come for me. Unless we stopped him first. My father was the one who said it. We need to go to the police. At first, I shook my head violently. No! If he finds out it was me, he'll kill me. He'll kill us all. But my father didn't back down. Not if we do it carefully. Not if we make sure he never sees it coming. My mother squeezed my hand. Emily, you've been living in fear long enough. Let us help you. Please. And in that moment, I realized they were right. Running wouldn't be enough. Hiding wouldn't be enough. Michael had to be stopped. So I gave them everything. The photos of the envelopes filled with cash, the receipts that didn't add up, the conversations I'd secretly recorded, his voice cold and threatening, the names he dropped in whispers when he thought I wasn't listening. Piece by piece, we built a case. And the next morning, my father walked into the police station with a folder thick with evidence. He didn't give him his name. He didn't tell them who it came from. It was anonymous, but it was enough. The investigation moved quickly, too quickly for Michael to even sense it was happening. Within weeks, raids were carried out. His associates were arrested, accounts were frozen, and then, one evening, I turned on the news and saw his face on the screen. Local businessman Michael Harris, arrested on charges of fraud, illegal possession of firearms, and suspected involvement in organized crime. There he was, in handcuffs, being shoved into the back of a police car. And I can't lie to you, when I saw that image, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. But relief is complicated, because with it came guilt. Guilt for dragging Hannah and her children into my twisted plan. Guilt for lying to a church of people who loved me. Guilt for staging a betrayal so convincing that even my own heart had broken watching it unfold. But then I would remember the look in Michael's eyes the night he grabbed my arm at the altar. The fury, the suspicion,
the promise of violence. And I knew. Guilt was better than fear. People still talk about that wedding. In town, it became a legend. The bride who was betrayed, the groom with a secret family, the wedding that ended in chaos. Some whispered that I had dodged a bullet. Others pitied me, said my life had been ruined. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that it wasn't betrayal that saved me. It was deception. I saw Hannah once more, months later. She was working at a diner on the edge of town, hair tied back, apron stained with coffee. She smiled when she saw me, though it was cautious, unsure. "Your wedding," she said softly. "It worked." I nodded, sliding an envelope across the counter. Money I had saved to give her, a thank you she more than deserved. "You saved my life," I told her. She shook her head. "No, you saved your own. I just played a part." And maybe she was right.
So now I sit here telling you this story, my story, not because I'm proud of what I did, but because it's the truth. And the truth matters. Michael is gone, locked away where he can't hurt anyone else. I am free, rebuilding my life piece by piece. But sometimes, late at night, when I stare at the ceiling and think about everything that happened, I ask myself, did I become him? Did I become manipulative, deceitful, cruel, just to get what I wanted? Maybe. But then I remind myself, what I wanted wasn't power, or money, or control. What I wanted was survival. And survival sometimes demands that you become the villain in your own story. Final reflection, direct to the audience. So, if you've listened to everything I've told you and you're still shocked, still horrified, good. Because maybe my story can remind someone else out there, no matter how trapped you feel, no matter how dangerous it seems to leave, there's always a way out. It may not be pretty, it may not be clean, it may not even feel heroic, but survival is worth the cost. And sometimes destroying the fairy tale is the only way to save the bride.